All right, well, it's been about a year and a half since I last updated and did the last video for my water cooling solution, which was the EK Waterblock's A320G, I believe it was. I still have it installed. I've still been using it. There hasn't been any real change to it, but I wanted to do an update, and I'll get some B-roll and some footage up in the background kind of showing some of what I'm talking about. But I just wanted to do kind of a talking head style video to give an update on the utilization and how I feel this has been going for year and a half that I've been using it. So overall, I still really love it. I think for the money that I paid, I definitely got my money's worth. If I look at the temperatures that I'm seeing consistently across the board, they're really solid, really good temps. The CPU, I think after I got it installed and I made sure everything was good, I had a couple air bubbles inside the CPU water block that I had to take the block off, shake those around. Ended up having to tip the case a little more, and then I had to get them out of the radiator again. But with the reservoir fully topped off, the amount of air in what you're seeing now on the screen versus what was actually burned away was about a third. As the air came kind of cycled through, I did not top it off. I have not refilled that reservoir since I installed it and did the original top off. So about a third of that loss was air coming through the system, coming out of the different water blocks and out of the radiator. So about a third of that's air loss. The other has been kind of cooked away, which it seems a little high for the amount that's burned off, but again, it's an open system. The only real maintenance I've done on it is 2 or 3 times over the course of this time frame. I have gone in there with a blacklight flashlight, and I've looked at all the fittings, the tubing. I've looked at a number of areas in there just to see if there's any leaks, anything coming out. The only thing I noticed was on a couple of the tubes, this is the nipple piece that comes out, or the barb that comes out of whatever it's going into, be it radiator or water block or whatever the case may be. The tube slips over the nipple, and then the screw part goes down and locks in. And I noticed that the cable butting up against the barb device, I could see a little bit of not leaking liquid, but I could just see a higher glow coming out around that edge of the rim. And when I looked at some of the others, they weren't quite as bright. So I made a few adjustments on that to make sure that the tubing was all the way connected to the butt end of what it was going over the barb on, just to ensure that there was no potential of leakage. Part of what I was seeing was likely a glow as the tube and the liquid was reflecting down the tube. It would hit and shine on the back of the plate there. But I just wanted to make sure that I had nothing there. I used some paper towels and I snuck them in between those areas just to see if there's any liquid, and nothing came out. So everything's been dry, everything's been solid, but I did notice that a few of the tubes had come off a little bit from just high temperatures making them more malleable, and so the way they were stretched and pulled, they might have loosened a little bit. So I just kind of went around and retightened everything. I didn't really loosen anything. I unscrewed it a little bit, and then I just shoved it back on after a high temp usage, and it was fine. There was no problem with it. I didn't have to take anything apart because, again, after a heavy session, things are typically pretty warm in there, so no big deal. That's really the only maintenance I've done. And to still have the performance that I have now, I'm really impressed. I think within a couple of days of getting it installed and everything stabilized and the air bubbles out, I bumped my CPU's overclock up to, I want to say 4 gigahertz. I have a 5820K, which stock is 3.3 gigahertz, so I immediately jumped it up to 4 gigahertz from the light overclock I'd been running with my SwiftTech H240X previously. And then from there, I bumped it to 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.4, and then 4.5 and 4.6. So I ran it at 4.6 for a couple of months. I had some stability issues, but they were kind of random. And I wasn't sure if I was overloading my power supply. It's a, how much is this thing? 760 watt. I keep forgetting that. I want to call it a 720. I get confused because I had somebody buy an 820. But it's a 760 watt Corsair power supply, and with everything under full load with CPU and GPU kind of getting hammered, that's where I think I may, at that speed, been running into a power issue where certain scenes in Grand Theft Auto where because I play at 5760 by 1200, in GTA, so I use all my screens. I think that's where I was getting courtesy reboots from that, and the way the system rebooted, it definitely came across as a power issue, so I may have just been power limited. I did dial back some of the power that was going through the vCore in the BIOS, and it kind of helped a little bit, but ultimately dialing it back to 4.4 was what solved the issue. And I think since then I've only had 1 or 2 courtesy boots when I've just been doing too much. I have tons of browser windows open in the background, and I'm doing way too much, and there's just too much consistent draw. When something hits it and it needs the power, it just couldn't sustain it. So I think that's what was going on. Recently I ran into an issue where I got a core problem. I haven't seen this blue screen of death before, and I believe it's just my motherboard because I've had a couple issues with my motherboard. The actual blue screen was a clock interrupt was not received on a secondary processor within the allocated time interval. So that was a rather unpleasant message. I rebooted the computer, again, back at 4.4 gigahertz. Well, I had to go back into the BIOS, reset everything because it blew everything back to defaults automatically, like the jumper had been tripped. Put it back to the 4.4, booted up, had everything running, no problems. Immediately, I started another render, and it froze again. Rebooted, back into the BIOS. I dialed it down to 4 gigahertz, and I had a secondary freeze, so I pulled it back again. Let me confirm what I'm at now through the tuning utility. Right now, I believe I'm at 3.8 gigahertz right now. I've pulled it back down, and I'm going to probably bump that back up to 4 gigahertz to 4.1 tonight to see if I can get it to sustain my overclocks again. But that was a pretty hefty dump when the system crashed on me there. That was a little rough. Now the motherboard I'm running, which is the X99 MSI Gaming 7S, I think it is, or whatever. It's a good board. I like it. I've been very pleased with it. But within the first year, the primary PCIe slot died, which is why I'm running it in slot 2. I was going to RMA the board, but having to take it completely out of the computer, take my RAM, CPU, just rip everything apart to take the board out, and then be down for their ETA of 1 month for 1 week shipping, 1 week assessment, 1 week repair, 1 week return shipping, minimum, was just crazy. Now, I doubt they could repair the PCI slot with what was going on. I think it's a soldering issue that may be fixed, but there may be some other damage on the board. I ran it for another month because I had about a month left on my warranty before it died. So I ran it just up to the edge of that with the GPU in slot 2, and I had no problems. I hammered the system with multiple stress tests. I had my overclocks going, and I had no problems. So I decided that I was not going to tear the computer apart and mess with that, because I couldn't be down for a month. And I didn't want to spend, at that time, $350 on another X99 board. So at this point, I'm kind of screwed if it is the motherboard. And I really think it is. I don't think it can handle the power delivery that's going through it now that I'm running audio boost, whereas before I wasn't running that since I switched to the Sennheiser earphones that I did a video for. So mixing the extra power to the audio boost, the high overclocks that I've been running, I think the board's not running as well as it could. And I found a few used ones. They're about $250 to $300 still. I'm not sure if I'm going to do that. I think I may just try to find a stable overclock at around 4 gigahertz that I can live with for a while. And then when Ryzen 4 comes out, I'll probably switch to that and replace the board and the CPU. I think I may have to replace the RAM. We'll see. But that's kind of where I stand now. Now, as far as the performance goes and load testing against this hardware, 4.4 gigahertz was not a problem. Peak temperatures on average in the summertime. I live in Dallas, so it gets pretty hot in the summertime. And I don't run the air conditioner a lot because it would just never turn off here. So ambient temperatures in this particular room were hitting about 80 degrees, I think 80 to 82 degrees on average when I was in a full session. So it wasn't exactly cool in this room. And the temps on the CPU never got out of 64, I think was the peak temperature that I hit on the CPU, and the GPU was about 60 to 62. It ran a little cooler because it's what goes in, the water hits it first, and then it cycles through the radiator and then back down. So the CPU would be about 64-ish, and the GPU would be about 60 to 62. So overall, heat soak in the loop was pretty good, and the two components were fairly evenly matched. Never had a problem with it. On average, right now, with it being winter and I don't run the heater a lot because, well, I have a heater under my desk being the computer, I think average temperatures are in the mid-50s with everything running. My GPU is typically running at, let me see where I've got it. The core clock is at a plus 184, which puts my 1080 Ti at about 2088 megahertz. I can get it to run at 2100, but depending on the game, it's a power issue. Again, I'm limited by what NVIDIA did with the core on here. They just restricted the V-core too much, so the power limitation is what causes it. When I hit 1.93, that's peak. And in certain games, like Ring of Elysium, the game doesn't need that much power. So I can hit 2113 even in Ring of Elysium with zero problems. Game doesn't need it. It can just run the GPU at that speed because there's nothing that's going on that's going to hit the card. Throw it in PUBG, immediate crash as soon as something comes in and it has to render a lot of information where the card would typically throttle up to get there. Now maybe I could go in and turn off throttling and do some other stuff in the graphics card to make it where it just locks in at that voltage and never changes, but that just seems like a waste. And I don't really want to go down that route. As this card ages, maybe I'll do the shunt mod and see if I can get some extra juice in it, because this card is fully capable of pushing more. In, I think, Heaven benchmark running at the 5760 by 1200 desktop resolution, I think I was able to hit 2166 on the GPU before it started having some weird artifacting and other problems at the current power. Temperature-wise, I've got plenty of headroom for temperatures in this loop, so I don't have any problems with temperatures. It's all just down to power restrictions. And my CPU, again, I had it at 4.6. I think I could have gotten it to 4.8 without major issues. It's just the power delivery started running into some issues, and I just didn't want to spend hour after hour rebooting, testing, rebooting, retesting. I just don't have enough time for that, so that's where it's been. So I'm extremely pleased with this loop. If you are considering any one of EK's aluminum loops, check your budget, check your utilization. If you're not going super crazy, then I think you'll be fine. I don't think I'm going heavy crazy with what I'm doing. Most of my load comes from either Premiere rendering or a game. That's it, really. I'm not doing any crazy computational stuff. I don't like synthetic benchmarks because they're usually unrealistic or they don't put the right type of load on the system, so I don't worry about that. The most I'll do is basically what I'm showing now, which is a stress test within the MSI tuning utility, where I'll just run a short stress test in there for 10, 15, 20 minutes. I've done longer ones. And that's all I really ever do. It only shows the stock speeds in here, which is not at all what I'm actually running at. But unless I put it down farther and I haven't throttled back up. But anyway, which it looks like 'cause I'm at 3.6. So yeah, I'm not running my proper overclock right now. Anyway, that's just what it's been. So this is a solid kit. I've had no problems. I am going to top it off now that I've had a year into it. I still have more than half of my initial fluid bottle that I purchased. I got the big fluid bottle. It's still more than half full, so I've got plenty of fluid in there to last me as long as I'm going to need this system for. When I switch to Ryzen, I'm hopeful that there's not a big change in water block, and because the die and the heat spreader on top should be roughly the same size, I should be able just to use the same block or just get another cheap $45 aluminum block from EK and just keep using the same kit because I don't want to take it apart. I'm extremely pleased with it. I think you would be too if it's in the range of what you're looking for. I'm not going to knock heavy custom kits and the full copper stuff. They will do overall a good job, but the aluminum, it's not a big deal. I don't understand why so many people have so much hate for these kits because it's essentially a custom loop. You can change parts out, you can build it however you want, you can assemble it however you want, and it does a good job at cooling. So I'm a year and a half into this kit, and I love it. It does a fantastic job. It's much better than my H240X. If I really was concerned about temps, I could throw in another 120mm radiator, and I have room for a 240 in the front. So I could add more radiators without any problem and drastically increase the cooling potential of the system. So But I don't need to do that. My temperatures are well within spec of the components I'm utilizing with just the 1320. And it's working great for me. So one last thought on that. My fan setup in this is I have 2 fans in the front that are 240 millimeters. They are doing intake. And then on the top, I have the 3 on the radiator pulling the air out the top of the case. And then I have another one in the rear that's pulling air out the rear. So it's more of a pull type of situation than a push type of airflow, static pressure situation in my case. The fans on the front, my stock Corsair fans died pretty quickly. The bearings were kind of crappy. But I did upgrade to their magnetic fancy bearing ones. They are very quiet, and they have really made quite a bit of a difference in what they're pulling into the case. So the cool air that's hitting the radiator and the internal components has been stepped up. I've noticed that by at least 1 to 2 degrees in overall potential just by changing those fans out, which I did 7, 8, 9 months ago. So that's just a bit of an update. If you have any specific questions for it or anything specific you'd like to see, just let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to pretty much wrap this one up here until I decide to rebuild the computer or something fails and I need to do an update. So thank you for watching.